We are continuing. This is a second week in a sermon series entitled My Imperfect Family, looking at some things that maybe we don't normally talk about when it comes to family. And today we continue on with a sermon called Better Half or Ball and Chain. In the 1600s, the British Empire came up with a new way to restrain prisoners. It was a piece of iron wrapped around the ankle with a short piece of chain, and it initially any large heavy item would do, but it eventually became a round ball that would weigh 8 to 10 pounds that would be attached to them, and the idea was that it would restrict freedom and mobility and would allow prisoners some area in which they could move, but they could not enjoy their life. That was in the 1600s. By the late 1800s, the practice had spread across the globe. And it started to be used by the late 1800s, early 1900s as a phrase. I looked up the definition. So here's the first definition. It's a funny or enjoyable statement made in a disparaging way, okay, about a spouse or significant other. So what that means is someone says it saying they think they're being funny, but there's really an element of truth about how they feel about their spouse. That's definition one. I'm not making this up. I don't write the internet. Definition two. Definition two, wife. I'm just, don't shoot the messenger. It was a phrase I never heard in my home growing up. I'll be the first to admit that. But I started working at a tire shop that was locally there in high school, and my boss, Mike, referred to his wife as that all the time, as the old ball and chain. I would go off into life, and I would realize there are definitely two distinct groups of men. There are those who refer to their spouse and the women in their life as their better half, and those that see them as the ball and chain. My question for you today is men. How do you view your spouse? How do you describe them? Women, how does your spouse describe you? And why? To understand this and how we're supposed to deal with this, we're going to go back 3,000 years into the Bible. We're going to go back to a passage, the whole book of Proverbs is written mostly by a guy named Solomon, King Solomon. But when we get near the ending chapters, we're going to have some different things that are added on. We get to chapter 31, and it begins with this statement: the sayings of King Lemuel, an inspired utterance his mother taught him. So the first thing is this King Lemuel. We don't know who that is. We don't know where he lived or anything about him. We might not even be a real person. The name Lemuel means belonging to God. And this may be a pen name. I'm a king who belongs to God. And ultimately what he's doing is saying, I want to put myself aside and I want to elevate godly practices. Now he says he was inspired from God to write this down as it was taught by his mother. Now, that could mean a couple of different things. It could mean, according to chapter 1 of Proverbs, his mom sat down with him and explained, this is what a woman's to do. But most likely, most scholars believe, because you read the description, this is what he saw from his mother. It was not her teaching, it was her actions that spilled over into his life. And so for the next few verses, he's going to begin verses 2 through 9 to describe what a king should be like. All right? At the end of that, in verse 10 through verses 31, and you have to be clear on this, he launches into a poem. Why do we know it's a poem and not a complete description of someone? Because it's an acrostic. What that means is he took the first letter of each of the Hebrew alphabet and he described it. So, like in English, it'd be he took the A and wrote a line of the poem. He took the B, then the C, then the D, and he just worked through the alphabet. There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Each one of them he starts the next sentence with. So, it's a poetic description through an acrostic of a woman. And I'm going to pick up and just read it. It's a long passage starting in verse 10. A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ship, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night and provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about the work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grips the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Now, I have to begin by doing a bit of explanation so we can apply this properly. The NIV, the New International Version, when it translates from the Hebrew to English, does something that drives me crazy. It doesn't translate, it interprets. So it begins off with the statement, a wife of noble character. Unfortunately, that's not what it says. It says a woman of noble character. So you have to know that this passage can apply to any woman. Mother, grandmother, sister, daughter, it doesn't make any difference. Spouse. This is a woman of noble character. And what he does then is he paints these brushstrokes of what it looks like to be that type of woman. And I want to just do today is look at quickly at two things which make a complete woman. Okay, two things. The first one is a woman's hands. A woman's hands. In this passage, over and over, there's this refrain about hands. In verses 17 to 20, 5 different times, he mentions hands, arms, and fingers over and over again. The hands are the source of action. And what we get underlined to us is that she is a hard worker. It comes up again and again, verse 17, verse 27. She works vigorously. She's this continually working for her family. Now, what a lot of people do is they go through this passage and they explain what each and every line means. I don't know that it's that significant. You can read them yourself. He's just trying to paint this picture so that you can see that she is a woman who's continually active with her hands, with her family, with her friends. Here's the point. In their culture, the woman stayed at home, and she didn't take that as an opportunity to be lazy. She was not lazy in any way. Maria Brunner made international headlines for a quote that she said. Her husband had lost his job and was unemployed, and she took on a second job. So she was working 2 jobs, coming home, trying to feed her family. Her husband, unbeknownst to her, was going out in the vehicle through the day and parking and getting parking tickets. He was not telling her, and they were beginning to accumulate. It didn't take too long, and they arrived at her door as her fines had now gone over $5,000. And she's there in Germany, and would have normally been a story that was sort of just swept under the rug. But she went to trial because the car was in her name. So at trial, they decide what they're going to do. Eventually, they say if you can't pay the $5,000 fine, 3 months in jail. And this is what made the international headlines. On the way out, they said, "Do you think you're being treated fairly?" And she said, "In all honesty, I'm looking forward to the rest." I suppose a hardworking woman sees prison as an opportunity to relax. She worked hard with her hands and all that she did. Out of that, though, she begins to become a blessing. And throughout this passage, she blesses multiple people. She's a blessing to her husband. Her husband has full trust in her because she handles everything well. I read a preacher this week who said he'd had 2 conversations almost back to back with different men. He talked to one man, and he said, "You know, in our house, she has her finances and I have my finances, and the two don't ever come together because if she took over all the finances, I'd be broke." He said, not too long after, I talked to another man, and he said, "Well, she has her finances, I have my finances, and I give her everything because if she didn't take care of it, we'd be broke." He says, "I have full trust in my wife. I know she's not going to waste and be idle. Her kids are going to rise up and call her blessed. She provides for him food and clothing and shelter. All of her basic needs, all of their basic needs get met through her." It's an old story. Maybe you've heard it. And it's a little boy was in the Christmas program, and he was so excited to have a line to say, but then Sunday got there, and he looked out, and the congregation was full, and like a deer in the headlights, he immediately forgot his line. Luckily, his mother was sitting on the front row. He looked over at her, and she had the line, said, "I am the light of the world." He stepped back on the stage proudly and smiled and said, "My mother is the light of the world." How do your children view you? The community was blessed. It says in this passage a couple of different ways. It says she takes care of her female servants. That would be like employees today. She takes care of her employees. She takes care of people in her community, takes care of the merchants whose ships come into town. She is trying to help everyone as much as she can. Show came on, it's been almost 10 years ago now. It's hard to believe. But a show called Extreme Couponing. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's right up my alley. When I saw it was on, I'm like, I got to find out about this. And so we tuned in, and I don't know whether there's a second or third show, but there was a lady from Florida, and she talked about how, you know, she does is she reads through each one of the supermarket ads, and then she has coupons, and she compares them. And whenever she finds something that she can buy for pennies on the dollar, what she'll go buy enough for her family, but then she takes every coupon she can get, and she buys as much as she can. Not to stock her pantry, but to take it up to the local food pantry, where she drops all of it off to bless someone else. That's the type of woman we have described in this passage. We have a woman who's continually working for the betterment of her husband, for the betterment of her kids, for the betterment of her community. But we can't just stop with our hands. We have to go to the second part of this, and that's the woman's heart. The woman's heart. In this passage, he starts with this statement, a wife of noble character. That word noble means respect, worthy of respect, and we really don't know how to translate it. If you had a different English translation, it may say a woman of excellent character. It may say something like a woman of virtuous character. It's a woman who has this strong character. She has a heart that is unlike other people, unlike the culture of her time. He asked this question at the beginning, a wife of noble character who can find. Then he goes on to describe what this woman might look like. But then he reaches verse 30 that gives us better explanation. In verse 30 he says, "Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting." We find out that most people in their culture, most ladies, were building a life of exterior. Charm means you can be engaging for a few moments. Beauty is something that looks outwardly nice, but he's underlining is those things can be deceptive. because one doesn't last very long, and the other can be a fakes you put on. Beauty is fleeting. It took me only a couple minutes to find an illustration. Sometimes I dig for hours. This one only took a couple minutes. Meg Ryan. Remember Meg Ryan, When Harry Met Sally, late 80s, early 90s, beautiful Meg Ryan. On May 6th, she emerged for the first time after her last plastic surgery. 6 months had passed, and when she came out, she now is almost unrecognizable as Meg Ryan. Because she's had plastic surgery after plastic surgery, trying to hold on to the beauty that she had, but unfortunately, it's fleeting. It comes and it goes. And so he says, you need to be building a life of character beyond just the exteriors. It's fascinating. So that description, a wife of noble character who can find, is used one other time in the Bible. It's used in the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verse 11. Boaz has been watching this woman work and serve in her family, and he describes her to the rest of the town as she is a woman of noble character. There are a lot of beautiful women mentioned in the Bible. Their beauty is underlined. There's a lot of women, I'm sure, who are charming and engaging, but none of them are described the way that Ruth is. She's a woman of noble character. Now, where does that character come from? That's what the rest of Proverbs 30 says. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The reason that she has this beautiful interior is because her life is built on the Lord. Where do you get your idea of beauty? Does it have depth to it? See, here's where some of us got our definition of beauty. Some of you, I'm older, used to go to a grocery store or Walmart. You'd stand in line, and there were all these women's magazines that griped at you about how imperfect you were. Well, they put pictures of women on the cover that had to be airbrushed. Now, please hear what I'm going to say. Now it's a different culture. And women's views, younger women, are being shaped by social media. It took me by surprise when I took, women and social media, women and the impacts of social media, drew up hundreds of thousands of hits, most of them from scholarly magazines and research journals. I went through some of it. So here's what happens. Our young ladies are beginning to view beauty through the lens of social media. And one of a couple things happens. One, they're getting the wrong ideas, all right, in comparison. See, someone can have a 30-minute video or 30-second video clip and be very charming, seem very witty, have great personality. If you get the right angle and the right camera, you can get a picture and a video, makes you look spectacular. And so girls are having this wrong view of what it means, what beauty looks like, because they're seeing these distorted images. Then on top of that, they're going out and they're sharing their own pictures and videos. And they're being met with comments of, you think that was good? You sure you don't need to lose a few pounds? They're being met with what's being called bullying. So they're getting met with comparison that is making them feel worthless and bullying that reaffirms it. And at least 1 in 50, that was the biggest number, maybe most conservative, that most places put 2 or 3 in 50 young girls are suffering because of it. It's leading to eating disorders. It's leading to drug addiction. It's leading to self-harm. What is your standard of beauty? What makes a woman? See, I just did a sermon series. I'm not going to recap the whole thing, but I'm going to give you something real fast. See, I did a sermon series called Identity, which I underlined to everyone here. Understand that you are created in the image of God, that God knit you together in your womb. You are born, and even though you sin, God still loves you, and He sent His Son to die for you, and He has a plan and a purpose for your life, and because of the resurrection, you have a hope that lasts into eternity. Your life has value, meaning, and worth because of your faith in God. And a life built on that truth is unshakable. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord has developed character. And so I ask, what's your view of beauty, and where does it come from? Is it coming from the Lord? I'd even take it a step farther. Is it coming from people of the Lord? See, in the New Testament, there's this encouragement for the older ladies to continue to teach the younger ladies in Titus chapter 2 about how to live this kind of life that has this beautiful interior. All this gets brought together in the New Testament. Peter writes this to the church in 1 Peter, his first letter, starting in chapter 3, verse 3. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles or the wearing of gold jewelry and fine clothes. Rather, it should come from your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. Build a life of this inner beauty, so out of your relationship with God will flow kindness and grace and mercy and forgiveness and love. This life is flowing out, and as you look around, the people who are influencing your life are other godly women. And with that, King Lemuel points us and paints for us this picture of a godly woman. Now, I want to bring an application in two different ways. First, to our ladies. I recognize that when I read this, there's some of you here go, yeah, not doing that. All right, I get that. I mean, there's all kinds of things in this passage. And this passage is, again, there's some poetic license that's written to paint this picture of a godly woman so that you will do is look past the lies of our culture and look to the biblical truth of what a godly woman looks like. It's being held up to you as a model, not to make you feel bad. I had a lady one time, no joke, she get every time I mentioned Proverbs 31 around her, she would get very angry. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm going to be. That's not what I'm about. I said, okay. But understand, you are aspiring to be something. What is it? Is it influenced by God? Now, it's not saying you're not going to have flaws and failures and your life's not going to look different than this, but overall, in the big picture, are your hands and your heart given to the right things? Now, the second application is for our men. He ends this passage very specifically, and it's easy to pass by it, but verse 28 and 31. In verse 28, he said, her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Honor for her, this verse 31, honor for her all that her works have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. If you have a woman in your life, if it's your spouse, I hope it's your spouse or your mother, your sister, whoever it is, praise them for their godly behavior. Praise them. And not just on Mother's Day. Today's easy, all right? The whole country gave you this one, all right? I'm talking about every day. Take the opportunity. She's not your ball and chain. She's your better half. And you need to look at her in the eyes and tell her that. Again, not just today, but repeatedly. You need to, in front of your children, say that to her. You need to, in front of friends, your friends and hers, praise her. you need to praise her when your friends are not around. You need to praise her when she's not around and the friends are the only ones there. That everywhere you go, you rise up and call her blessed. Even when you're in the city gate, even when you're far away from her, you're continuing to say, man, she's some kind of woman. Now, I want to pull all this together. Because here's the thing. Living a life of interior beauty, well, it's not going to get recognized. See, passing beauty and charm, those are going to be Instagram success. Those are always going to be popular, famous. They're always going to be out there for people to see. But someone of real character, it's not going to get noticed too much. In fact, I've got to go back. Ilian Jones was a writer of the last 100 years. He interviewed Ida Tarbell. You might know that name. Ida Tarbell was the first woman investigative journalist, okay? And she died in the 1950s, but previous to that, she'd blazed a trail where no other woman had gone. And so in curiosity, Ilian Jones was interviewing her and said, I want to know who are the greatest, most fascinating people that you've ever met? And she responded, well, the greatest people I've ever met, most people would have no idea who they are. And he said, it sparked in me an interview I read about from the New York Times. The New York Times had tried to interview a group of ladies, and they said, we want to find out who are the 12 greatest women in the world today. So they sent out surveys and questions to figure out who the greatest women were. And when it came back, they reached this conclusion, that the greatest women in the world today are mostly not known outside of their own family. And then there was question was posed. Who's greater? The person who stands up in front of others and accomplishes a task, or the mother who taught them how to do it? Who's greater? The person who stands up in leadership and asserts themselves, or the woman who stood beside them through the good days and the bad, continually offering support? See, the reason that he poses this question, a woman of noble character, who can find someone like that, is because they're usually not front page headlines people. But they are the people in your life. And you have the opportunity today and every day to praise them. A woman of noble character. Where can you find a woman like that? Well, my hope is that there's a bunch of them in this church. Let's pray. Father God, I pray a blessing upon all the women in this room. May they not buy into the lies of our culture about what beauty is, but develop that inner beautiful peace and spirit and character. And may it overflow into their family. And God, for those of us who live with them, help us to praise them and spend time letting them know we appreciate all that they do for us, not just today, but every day. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.